Moms who know do less so they can focus on what matters most, taking care of themselves, their families, and living their God-given purpose. Moms who know focus on the little things they can do that grow to have a huge impact. You are connecting with your family, your true self, and your God-given purpose. You are a mom who knows. Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanel Nielsen, and I'm joined today by Misty Tyme. Misty, thank you so much for being with us.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we are going to have a great conversation today, mainly around forgiveness. And Misty is the expert on all things forgiveness, on how to do it, on why we need to, on all these things. But what I'm really excited to hear from Misty about today is her story. As I've read over her book, she just has powerful life lessons on forgiveness. And so I'm excited for you guys to learn from her. So let me tell you a little bit more about Misty, and then I'll hand over the mic to her. So Misty Tyme is an author, speaker, corporate trainer, forgiveness expert, certified death doula, interfaith reverend, and creator of the forgiveness algorithm. So Misty, I would love for you to start off by taking us back to your growing up years, to kind of everything that led you to having forgiveness need to be a part of your life.
Well, I'm really excited to share this story because, when I go to workshops or anything, I always start them with this one sentence: who here has a family? And I usually get a little rumble of laughter. And that's because our first best friends and our first mentors and everything come from our family. But also that's where our conflict comes from. I mean, I'm not going to ask you about your family, but I bet you can relate to hearing family stories, right?
Right.
Right. Well, I was born into a family that was definitely chaotic. My mother was a professional singer, super beautiful. Think Elizabeth Taylor, 6 husbands, martini on one hand, man on the other. Great fun at a party, not necessarily as your mother. And I didn't come into the world alone. I came into the world with a twin brother who truly was my best friend, my first playmate. But as we grew up, and I'm going to shorten this as best I can because it's a life story, right? We were born into a chaotic alcoholic haze, and we were each other's best friend and protector of each other. And as we grew, unfortunately, my brother turned into the person we used to hide from. And as I grew up, I always felt like I was going to overcome that. And we didn't really have a lot of contact with each other. He was a rageaholic and he was an alcoholic, and I didn't want that in my life. Now, let's be clear. I was far from perfect. My pain and history, I made some bad choices. Let's put it this way. This reverend's had some marriages under her belt and picked badly. But ultimately, I knew that I was in better condition in my life than my brother was. And I would do anything I could to point out to him how wrong he was and how right I was. So I had a great corporate career, and then I decided to give back in the world. And so I went back to school and became a reverend. I actually went to seminary. And at the end of seminary, I really thought I would be working in death and dying. It's kind of my favorite subject. At least I thought it was. And then soon after seminary, my twin brother took his own life. He killed himself. And I used to say, oh, when he dies, I'll be fine. Like he wasn't the picture of health. And so I didn't think he would live a very long life, but I didn't think he would ever take his own life. And there I was, left behind with not just the grief, which I had been quite familiar with in my life, but anger and pain and unfulfilled expectations. Ultimately, he didn't ever fulfill the expectation of being the brother I always wanted. To be even closer than my brother, we were twins. We were supposed to have some psychic twin connection, and I kept waiting for that to happen, and ultimately it never did. So there I was, stuck in grief and unforgiveness. So I kind of set out on a path to answer that question, what is forgiveness? Only because I wanted to feel better. It really came from my own need to heal. And so in that, I really discovered that forgiveness isn't just religious. I mean, we hear that the most. I don't know about you and your past and your religious upbringing, but in society, we hear that we're supposed to, quote, let it go. Just ask Disney. We are supposed to let it go and move on. But the problem is no one tells us how. And that's smack dab where I was. And so I did the deep research on the how. And when I figured out the how, I was like, oh, I need to share this. And that's kind of where my journey began in sharing my forgiveness solution, my forgiveness algorithm.
Awesome. Okay. And I think that it's interesting, no matter what our upbringing, and mine was pretty smooth, pretty easy, and
So
yet
you're the
there's,
one. You're the
I,
one that
I
had that
am.
childhood. Oh, I'm so glad.
I had it pretty good. I'm the oldest of 8 kids, and mom and dad in the home, still happily married, just that nice growing up childhood that we
Awesome.
all, kind of hope we could have. But I was going to say, even within that, there are things to forgive. There are things that, my parents didn't do perfectly. There are, moments, scars, both figurative and literal, that my sister and I inflicted on each other. And, there are things in a family because it's just not perfect. And so I can only imagine where the family life was so rough that there are so many layers of things to forgive. I mean, you mentioned your brother, but also with your mom, also with, other people in the home, because it's just, the home is where it all comes out, and we see each other as we really are, right? And so there's no hiding. So I would love for you to go even a little bit deeper. You mentioned, alcohol was a big factor, rage was a big factor. Give me an example or an experience of what that was like from your perspective in your growing up years.
Well, in all the people I speak with, and I'm so glad that you had that childhood. I'm lucky my husband had that childhood. Um, Most people still go through trauma and drama because it's a part of our human experience. And we need to learn to grow through that and what that really means and heal. But ultimately, there is a level of just not acceptable, right? Like kids should not grow up in chaos. They shouldn't, because it sets them up for repeated bad behavior, is what I call people who don't adult very well. And it's because we learn from our growing up years. And there was domestic violence in my life. There was physical violence between my brother and me. It was really chaotic. And in my workshops, I usually speak about a story that is so difficult, because most people can't even wrap their brains around it. But when you come into a room and your brother is holding a gun to your mother, and you know that you're the only one that is going to stop this or try to maneuver this, it sticks with you. That was not an unlikely situation in my home. So um, I just knew that I didn't want that kind of life. And my brother's pain was both from very bad physical abuse. He was sexually abused. He was powerless. He was a powerless child. And in my forgiveness journey with him, I went back and looked at that child that was my brother. See, the problem is when you grow up together, you not only share some drama together, like we shared a lot of pain and anger and drama together, but we made our own drama also because we were acting out from our own bad situation. And some people just don't have the DNA. They just, whatever it is about them, they don't get over it as well. He chose alcohol, um, which enabled him to continue in a really bad cycle. And he continued that through his adult life. So, to get to your question, my life was one of those that you would see on Lifetime. Like you would see that movie and you'd be like, oh my gosh, how did those people grow up to be adults, period? I mean, it was just a bad situation. In saying that, there was still love in my situation. When I talk to, I work with a nonprofit for parents and kids for adoption, and you talk to these foster kids who have gone through what made my life look like Disneyland. They still want their biological family. They still want them. They love them. They want them. They just want them to do better and be better. And I would echo that. I used to think that God put me in the wrong family. Like, oops, there was another 2.5 pound twin born that day, and they picked up the wrong kid, right? But ultimately, that wasn't the case. This was my family. This is the family, and I can see it as a blessing now. But I still love my mom and I love my brother. Did not know my biological father. He left before I was 2. But I got an adopted father that was my mom's 5th husband. Yes, 5th husband. Um, and he was the best man in their situation. And I know he truly loved me. So I learned so much through all of that. But if I could go back with a magic wand, I would still want them. I just would want them to do better and be better.
Yeah, and I think that's what we all want as children. And because we're talking to moms primarily here,
Hmm.
it's such a it's just such an empowering and hopeful thought to know that your kids, even when things are really rough, they still want you. You are the one that they want. And that's so amazing to know that, even when we mess up, they still want us. Maybe they want us to do better, but they want us. And I love that. Now, you really talked, I heard about your brother's pain. I heard about kind of the surface level. I would love to go deeper here into your pain. And just obviously, this is such a volatile situation. What did that feel like? What were your coping mechanisms at the time? How did you deal with this in the moment?
Well, we kind of go back to what our strengths are, right? What our natural DNA makes us. And for me, it was about achieving. I knew that if I could do well in school, do well in other activities, I got a lot of fulfillment from that. Now, that also meant that I didn't want my friends coming over to my house because I was embarrassed by that. And so I did everything I could to avoid that. In chaotic situations, we do learn a lot of skills. And I learned the skill of negotiation. I learned skills on how to be in control of my own situation, right? Like that I had these choices and I needed to, as a child, it was I had to make myself be safe, which is unfortunate. No child should ever have to do that. They should feel safe in their own home. But I became very skilled at solving problems. And the pain that I had then, and that's the other thing, that there's a little bit of a misconception that kids who are going through something like that understand the pain that they're going through. Like they're like, they don't really understand at that time their emotional drama that's happening in their heart, mind, and soul. It is
Hmm.
something that we recognize when we're older because you don't know what you don't know, right? I remember watching the Brady Bunch and seeing happy families and the Waltons and all that. So I'm dating myself for real. Um, and I knew then that, ooh, I kind of want that. That's what I want. What's going on? I don't like it. That I knew. But again, I wanted my parents to turn into the Waltons, into the Brady Bunch. And that, unfortunately, in a child's brain makes sense, but in real life that doesn't make sense because they were living their pain, their drama, their bad decisions, however they came to them. And the goal as you grow up and hopefully get help because you recognize that this is not healthy, is that you become healthy because it's about repeating patterns. And I think my pain came from the fact that I really, really wanted a, a happy, wonderful childhood, and I didn't get that. And when you realize that, that realization usually hits around teenage years and you're already rebellious, is that you already don't like your parents, even in the best situation. I all of a sudden did everything I could to get away from my family. So I actually moved out of my own house as a senior in high school and had my own apartment and worked two jobs because I was able to do some achieving, and that made me feel better about myself, and I went and found my own calm. And I, to this day, am proud of myself for that.
Yeah, as you should be, as you should be. I mean, for being so proactive and for finding something that worked for you. Um, and yet the scars remain, right?
Yep. Yep.
As you've had to deal with then the relationships and all these things and forgiving your brother for what he put you through. And I love that, this has turned into this journey for you of working on forgiveness, of helping others with forgiveness. So, how do you actually define forgiveness? What does it mean to forgive?
Well, I work in what I call the woo woo world, which is that whole idea that magic will just show up and it'll all be fine and that kind of stuff. And actually, there is work to be done. And part of that is understanding what forgiveness is and is not, because there's so many myths and misconceptions about forgiveness. And my favorite one is that you're supposed to forgive and forget, like last time I checked, elephants and people, we don't forget.
Right.
And so I really did define forgiveness by looking it up in the dictionary. And I talk about that in everywhere that I go because forgiveness is actually a verb. It's a thing that we do. And what is it? We're supposed to stop feeling anger and resentment towards someone. And I have to tell you, that right there is pretty hard because ultimately, and there's a lot of studies, and I talk about this in my book and in my courses and stuff, that talk about why we can't seem to stop feeling anger and resentment towards someone, what it is. And the other piece about forgiveness is that, yes, it's an actual thing we do in our heart, mind, and soul. You can actually feel forgiveness. You can actually feel that action when it happens. And it's a magical moment. And that's where the magic comes in.
Okay. So, of course, that leads to the next question, which is then how?
Then how?
People want this, but how do we get that?
Yes, and ultimately the how is not as complicated as we think. I read a lot of deep books, talked to every type of spiritual leader from, uh, you know, rabbi to pastors to everything to try to get that how. And ultimately, it's about adjusting our expectations. And I'm going to give you a sentence that I ask all your listeners to think about when they have a difficult person or situation, or even about themselves, right? Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. Some people do not have the will or the skill to meet your expectations. Now, what I mean by this is some people don't have the will. They plain old don't want to, right? You might think that they should. This is what you expect in this relationship, and you might absolutely be right. But they don't have the will. They plain old don't want to. But most commonly in relationships, people start out with the will, but they don't have the skill, which simply means that, like in my life, right, I didn't grow up with good examples. I had to learn those examples later. But some people never learn. They think they want to do that, they really want to, but their real life shows up. They either have mental health issues, addictions, or they never had good teachers. They plain old don't have the skill. So they lose their will. So in a situation, next time, whether it be with a spouse, sibling, parent, friend, coworker, ask yourself, do they have the will to meet my expectations? And ask yourself what those expectations are. They're probably reasonable. I guarantee you, most people have pretty reasonable expectations. But did these people have the will? Did they want to? And, sometimes we plain old just don't want to do something. And then, do they have the skill? Do they have the ability to do what you think they should do in the relationship? So that is really the number one thing that changed the how for me. Was I was able to look at my brother, my mother, my bio dad, my adopted dad, all of the people, my exes. Did they have the will? I would say yes, they did. And I have many stories about why I know certain people had the will. Did they have the skill? My mom didn't. She was an alcoholic. She had her own emotional situations that didn't make her the best mom that she could have been. And ultimately, some people lose their will and they leave. That's why you see a lot of parents, they check out. That's why people divorce. That's why people leave jobs or friendships. So they lose their will. They're like, I'm out. No more for me. I was able to look at my brother and see that unfortunately he had the will. He wanted to be my brother. He didn't have the skill due to all the sadness. And darn it, empathy snuck right in and forgiveness happened.
So is that really the key then, is empathy?
Empathy is a big key. I would say 90% of the key. Do you have to have empathy for somebody else? Not necessarily. Um, Sometimes it just answers that why question. Most of the time, we want to know why something happened, and sometimes the why is very hard to find. But if you can go down somebody's history and say this, and this, it answers the why. It doesn't mean that you don't think they should have done the right thing, and you might not have an emotional connection to them, so empathy is harder to pull in. But I do have some tricks to help with that. I talk about that in my classes and in my book. But ultimately, for me, empathy was a huge key for my forgiveness journey.
Yeah, I can see how it would be. I mean, even just asking these questions puts you in a place of understanding that person and of kind of getting over yourself. And it does, when you do that, when you get over yourself, it kind of does release that anger as a byproduct. As you're thinking about them, it can help you to get less angry. And that's really what forgiveness, how you've defined it, what it is.
Right. And also we have a deep need to be right. We have a deep, deep need to be right and the other person to be wrong. And I would definitely ask your listeners to ask themselves, um, is it because I want to be right here? And I can guarantee you, I wanted my brother to be wrong and own it, admit it, and apologize for it, and then magically change. And then I knew everything was going to be fine. So it's about deciding how much you want to be right, because right doesn't make you happy.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings up another question. Sometimes the person we need to forgive is this, I feel like, okay, what if the person we need to forgive is God? We're mad at God because, we feel like we've been dealt an unfair hand. And I know you have some experiences where you've been dealt sort of an unfair hand. You can touch on those a little bit, but how do we then forgive him who he has the skill? He absolutely has the
Right.
skill to, meet my expectations. Talk
Right.
to us about that.
Right. Well, I'm going to talk. I get this often, especially I worked in pediatric oncology for a long time clinically. And there's a lot of how the heck, like, I don't get it. I'm angry. I'm angry at God. Why does bad things happen to good people? And has a lot to do with that darn thing called free will. God is going to ask the same question. He would ask the same, he, she, however your listeners want to define God, the same question of my parents, of me. It has to do with free will and choice. God wants the best, happiest life for you, and he gives you the choice to choose that. He also gives you the choice to practice forgiveness as we have been forgiven. And because we all make mistakes, right? Did we have the will or the skill to meet God's expectations,
Mm.
right? So I would say do the same for every single person in your life. Now, that doesn't mean, I want to be super clear before we run out of time, is that even if you forgive someone, it doesn't mean that you have to let them back in your life. That's a myth and misconception I get all the time. And I want to be super, super clear that if my brother was still living, I could have worked on forgiveness for him. I could have forgiven him. I could have been more empathetic. But I guarantee you, he wasn't coming over for Sunday dinner
Mm.
because of the chaos that came with him. But my forgiveness would have made me a kinder person towards him. And that is deep change.
Yeah. And that's what we all want. I mean, that's exactly it, right? We want that freedom that comes from forgiving. So I would love just to hear this one last thing from you, because one of the goals of Moms Who Know is to really make motherhood simpler. How does forgiveness simplify motherhood and really life?
Oh, and I have 6 children and a grandchild. So I can tell you that it has changed me as a mom because I'm now able to look at all my children who are generally grown and forgive them for not meeting my expectations because they didn't have the will or the skill, right? They don't want to follow it the way I did it, way I think they should do it. And wow, have I let them off the hook? And then also I've been able to ask for forgiveness from my children in my bad decisions that I know deeply affected them. And I was able to own it, understand what a good apology looks like, know how to make amends, and say to them, I was wrong, because I'm now able to get rid of that deep need to be right. And it's amazing when you own your own stuff, how it lets people love you more because they're no longer trying to prove how wrong you are and how right they are either, right? It opens
Yeah.
a whole conversation. And I've been able to ask my grown children about the divorces that they witnessed and what it did to them, and deeply apologize for that, and then tell them, please, please, please gain the skill in your life so you don't ever have this repeated generational pain.
Misty, I love that. I love that so much, that conversation, that healing, that legacy then that is passed on, both from, what you're hoping to teach them, but also from that conversation that then now as parents that they're going to look to their kids and like, okay, what do I need to do better for them? How am I going to show up differently because of this? So I love that. There's been so much good stuff that you've brought out today. I know people are going to want to learn more. Where can they go to find out more from you?
Please go to mistytyme.com. And that time has a Y in it. So it's MISTYTYME.com. I have a free class. I have how to forgive your ex, how to forgive your family. And you can also get my book there and tons of free downloads.
Perfect. Okay. We will link that in the show notes and you guys go and check that out and get a little deeper. If this is something, especially that you feel like is holding you back or you feel like you're struggling with, use those free resources and get that help. Now, Misty, to finish off, I would love to end with this. What one little thing do you hope that people do and take action on after hearing this conversation today?
Well, I really want you to take action in every single one of your interactions today, whether it be with a waitress at a restaurant or a family member or a spouse. And when you feel that unfulfilled expectation pop up, ask yourself, do they have the will or the skill to meet my expectation?
So simple and so powerful. I love that. That is something we can all do. And I would love to hear you guys what happens when you do that. So share with us on social media. Let us know. And thank you again, Misty, for being with us today.
Well, thank you. This has been so much fun, and just have a splendid, blessed day.
You too. And thank you everyone for listening to Moms Who Know. Wasn't that a great call with Misty Tyme? She was a lot of fun. And, I just think forgiveness is one of those topics that we all need. And sometimes we don't even realize how much we need it. It's easy when you're hearing a story like hers, oh, yeah, you need to forgive your brother. It's affecting your whole life and it can be big. But I think forgiveness can also be really small. It can be forgiving, our husband for being a little bit late, or forgiving our kids for spilling on the ground, really little things. The quicker we're able to forgive, the quicker we're able to get to that place, the more connection that we have. And so I think there's a lot here to ponder, and I hope you guys will give this some thought. And then, of course, I hope you'll come over to Facebook or Instagram. You can find me at either place at Moms Who Know Podcast. And let me know what one little thing you are going to do or even think about differently because of what you've heard today. I love it when I hear from you guys. So let me know. If you love this episode, be sure to share it, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.